Over the past year, it can be a bit of a challenge with regards to taking on this whole COVID narrative. But I've been consistent now for almost 5 years as we come up to February of 2025, because I started the research in about February of 2020. At the time, very little was known about COVID. And my research, because of how I research complex diseases, because this is what I do, I take complex diseases, I dissect them, I try and make sense of them. And it doesn't matter if it goes against the narrative. That's my approach. This is what I've done. I've been doing it for over a decade with regards to dementia. And so I believed that if I could solve dementia, I could definitely solve COVID. And I was right because I picked up on autoimmunity very quickly by April of 2020. And at this point, I would say categorically, if anyone in the scientific community does not have as a major part of their understanding autoimmunity, they will not be able to make sense of anything that is happening now or what will happen in the future. All I've done is extrapolate on what it is that the science tells me. And I think this is why it has resonated with people because I could anticipate where the problems were coming. Additionally, I had the tremendous privilege of speaking with many experts across the world. You can imagine what it's like having spoken to Gert van den Bosch on multiple occasions and hearing his insights, listening to Dr. Chetty from a clinical point of view, speaking with Robert Malone about the mRNA technology. All of these things have added to that growth that I've had over the past 5 years. And it puts me in a position where I think what I'm saying is largely accurate. Not perfect, but largely accurate. And when we look at what it is that has happened in 2024, it has been because of the support over 12,355,978 impressions, almost 10.5 million views, 783,000 reactions, and over 174,686 followers. What's interesting is that this is the vast majority of my input and my reach in terms of social media, but it doesn't include the newsletter and it doesn't include my Substacks, which are where I am a little bit more frank and I put down a few more of my thoughts about what is happening. This is on the back of censorship. And you may not realize it now. And one of the things you have to look out for very soon is that I need to be telling you where you can follow me in case I lose access to you here on this channel. So these are the things that you have to look out. So imagine if I wasn't being censored and the content was allowed to just expand, how many other people I could have reached in this time. When I reflect again on the science, and this is the thing that I am doing, it's not so much about who is right and who is wrong. It's about really fundamentally the science. And for you to grasp what it is that I'm looking at, is that this is some of my slides from my 360, my COVID 360. And this is not all of them. And all of these slides represent a point that I could highlight in terms of getting people to understand what is going on in terms of COVID 19. And one just scanning through here, if I say jump to this slide here is probably, one of this slide here, the full spectrum of COVID 19, is probably one of the more important slides because it tells you the whole picture as to how the disease manifests from the subclinical asymptomatic stages, the bronchitis, which a lot of people have, the viral pneumonia. You don't know how much confusion there exists with regards to people who may have died of a COVID viral pneumonia, as opposed to people who died of moderate or people who were sick with moderate COVID and died of severe COVID. And how all of these interact into getting an understanding about the pathophysiology is essential to making sense of where we are now. Part of the problem that much of the scientific community has is that they don't have these insights. And so to try and piece together what exactly is happening now is extremely difficult. And this is part of the reason why I think that the information is so very valuable. So this is not just about me talking about stuff for the sake of talking about it. It's because it is such a critical part of people's health. Without that autoimmunity paradigm, nothing is really going to make sense. And when we published our paper in 2021, this is in Frontiers in Immunology, and we were looking at autoimmunity against ACE2. We still have about almost 23,000 views of that paper, which was published in 2021. We had actually finished it in July of 2020, but it took so long for it to be published. And even within this paper, there are a number of things that I would want to update because the science has continued to evolve. But the principles with regards to autoimmunity are so critical and so accurate in terms of predicting how the disease manifests. And this is the point that I'm making, is that it is because of that understanding as to how the virus interacts with the immune system, how the impact of the virus on the immune system leads to disease presentation, and how the impact of the spike protein, and this is the bit that causes a lot of confusion, and this is where I get into trouble with regards to the narrative, because I emphasize that at this stage of the pandemic, what we're dealing with is a combination of recurring infection and immune priming. That's what I consider to be a COVID storm. And this COVID storm is what is likely to be driving disease for decades. Because at the moment, we can't seem to stop the circulation of virus. And with that ongoing circulation of virus, every time someone gets exposed, they can get an unusual pattern of symptoms. That's the thing that is really, really complex. To give you an example, I have seen this on multiple occasions. An individual who is just been exposed in terms of being in an environment where lots of people are around, just exposed to COVID, where they already had some degree of priming. And this can occur not just in the vaccinated, but in the unvaccinated as well. They get symptoms, unusual symptoms, say after if they've been out. And what I have learned, an example was a personal one where the individual was saying they were getting back pain in almost the same location. And I learned this from Dr. Chetty that very often, if you're getting those kinds of symptoms, it could be related to mast cells, mast cell activation. And so, if normal pain relief is not working, I usually recommend a trial. Just get over the counter a simple antihistamine. If the antihistamine impacts on the symptoms, it suggests that it's an inflammatory process involving mast cells and is likely to be related to exposure to this virus. It is so complicated. But once you have the understanding of that autoimmune paradigm, once you're able to analyze the trajectory of the disease, it gives you a head start to be able to make sense of what we see happening around us. As I said before, the reflection in terms of where we are and what has happened over the past year, and the one of the outcomes, as usual, is to do with the with our book, Are You Prepared Against Disease X? This was really a summary of a lot of the research that I had done over the past 4 years and putting it together in this concept. And you have to remember, this was a broad look at the pandemic. It was not critical of any specific action, but it highlighted the strengths and weaknesses of everything. And so you would find in it that it didn't criticize whether or not there was a vaccine. It didn't criticize whether or not people masked. It didn't criticize whether or not people were unvaccinated. It looked at the strengths and the weaknesses of each axon and looked as well at the drugs that could have been beneficial if they themselves had not been censored. We have a long way to go in terms of what we have to do. But in summary, I am just so grateful for the support that I've had during this time. As I said, the numbers speak for themselves. Over 12 million impressions, 337 post shares, 783,000 reactions and likes over that period of 12 months. And so the hope is that in the year to come and the continuous months, I can continue to speak and share the science, because we are likely to continue to see an evolution of this pandemic. The question is, how do we make sense of it? How do we understand what is happening? And critically, how do we protect ourselves? Thank you for being with me on this journey. Have a great evening.